York City.
So from Utah to New York City, but from Vermont. Who lives in Vermont?
A lot of people do. Like the way that you asked that, are you saying like what type of person would live in Vermont? Is this
Yeah.
judgmental already?
I guess I'm just curious, right? Because I feel like you meet so many people. At least, I've been to 42 states, right? Vermont's not one of them, unfortunately. But I've never heard,
Clearly.
I've never heard anyone, I guess I've just never met anyone from Vermont. So I guess, yeah, what's it like in Vermont? What are people like? Is it, because you go all the way up to Maine and people have like an accent up there. And so like,
Right.
so what's it like?
Vermont is great. Vermont does live up to its stereotype of being very chill.
Okay.
Um, and common stereotype is that Vermont is just filled with farms and
Okay.
everybody must just be farmers. The funny thing is that when I met my girlfriend Sarah, she said she was surprised that I was to hear that I was from Vermont because I was like really well dressed when she met me, because she just the stereotype of farmers and everything. So there are big cities in Vermont, but it's just like everybody's just chill in
Okay.
Vermont. Everybody's really nice. Everybody cares. Everybody's really into community. And I say that because I've lived in Colorado before too. So Vermont is very much like a miniature Colorado in terms of
Okay.
culture, just in terms of like the food and the breweries and the distilleries and just a lot of the things that everybody's very independent and entrepreneurial, but they also still really love the community and being very proud of being in Vermont and from Vermont. So I love Vermont. It was just too small for me. Like I very much like to travel. So I've moved around quite a bit.
Yeah, okay. That all right. That gives me a better idea of it. That's that's awesome though, because like um I feel like people, are always chasing that big place and where everything's happening, but I think the places where you hear nothing about are some of the best places to go and live because everyone's just worried about what's going on in their little area and their little bubble, and it doesn't matter what's going on in the rest of the world. And like that's so I guess what I'm saying is I've never me not hearing stuff is probably just as good of a review about Vermont than
That's true.
anything. But there's that.
Well,
It's funny you say farmers too, because there's one dude. I remember I listened to Joe Rogan, um, who runs a ranch out there and helps people like get. He helps like oversized people, right? And he just feeds them. He puts them on a diet of like you can only eat raw vegetables. It makes them hike like 30 miles a day or whatever.
amazing. Not surprised. That's, yeah. People have the property there.
Yeah. So you moved from Utah. Then when did that move to Utah happen?
That happened 3.5 years ago to Utah. I was living in Boston at the time. That's where I met my girlfriend. She got a job in Utah. And it's funny that what you just brought up about how it's almost better sometimes when you don't know about a place. Because when she and I moved out to Utah, that was like right at the brink of social media blowing up about like national parks and all these cool destination places for influencers and models to go like take that perfect picture.
Right.
And so we got there right before that surge happened. And she's a snowboarder, I'm a skier. We love the mountains, we love traveling. And so in our time there, like you were just talking about, as people heard more and more about Utah, we saw the surge happening. And so uh it very much, for a long, long time, Utah was that exact same way. People just kind of like knew about Utah, thought it was just filled with Mormons, like didn't know about the ski resorts really. And then while we were out there, it just absolutely exploded.
Nice.
So
That's a great time. Were you able to get, I guess, property out there? Because that's one thing I definitely have looked into. Is like Salt Lake City. It was like you said, a very I wouldn't say unknown, but no one was like, "Yo, let's move to Salt Lake City tomorrow." Um,
yeah.
and now it's becoming more popularized and actually more expensive to live there. So I don't know. Were you able to get any
Mhm.
like property or any investments out there? Or
We
did you
weren't. We
did
were. We thought about it and wanted to. We knew that it wasn't going to be a long term place for us to live in Salt
right?
Lake City. We felt the same way, Curtis. Honestly, like I never imagined living in Utah. and like, but I, and when she got the job out there, I was just like, okay, well, what could Utah be like? Because I lived in Colorado, and Utah was literally just kind of like living in Colorado's shadow. And so um so yeah, the real estate has like skyrocketed in lots of ways, and we would love to have a place there at some point, but did not get any property this time around.
Okay. And now you live in New York City where it's almost impossible to get property.
Yeah, exactly. We like to challenge ourselves.
Awesome. So at what point, I guess, where did you start doing life coaching? And really, when did you decide, I guess, what did you do? And when did you decide that, like, I'm assuming you didn't start off as a life coach, right? Maybe you did. But I feel like you have to experience life a little bit before you can start coaching about life. So what exactly uh happened, and when did that switch happen for you to become a life coach, and why did you specifically target people either my age or millennials, right? So I don't know anymore. I was born in 98, so 23. A lot of people, it should be its own age group, right? Because we're half non-technology, half technology, so it should be its own
Yeah.
generation. But yeah, millennials, Gen Zers, what made you decide that, and when did that happen?
Sure. Well, first I'll say the thing about labels and titles, which you and I could go into in a whole longer conversation, is that, because I'm not a licensed therapist, even though I provide a very therapeutic experience for people, it still can't be called legally therapy,
Right.
right? Or I can't technically, like, I don't think anybody would arrest me if I was calling myself a therapist. I don't even know. I've just never risked it. But technically my business falls in the category of coaching. That being said, any of my clients, I let them kind of call me whatever they want. I don't like job titles, and I don't think
Okay.
a title defines me at all. So I do a version of coaching, and I'll oversimplify it. I do the depth of long-term psychotherapy in a short-term coaching format. And
Okay.
that's my business model. And so people will call me a coach, people will call me a therapist, whatever they feel like is like the thing that they need. um, but to answer your question, no, I did not immediately start out as a life coach, and I completely agree with you that people who are going to become life coaches definitely should have some life experience, or therapeutic experience, or just experience.
Right.
I'm going to be very diplomatic as I say that, because I do unfortunately know a lot of people who became life coaches who I would judge weren't ready,
Yeah.
weren't at a place to do that. But so to answer your question, in college, I studied neuroscience and psychology and philosophy, and was really interested in all the interplay of all of those. And then I got connected into mental health related jobs, because by the end of school I was like actually interested in working in mental health. Before that I was just kind of a nerd about all of it, didn't know what my job prospects would be. And then so one internship led to a mental health job with children, and I chose to work in crisis oriented treatment for kids, because at least my belief at the time was that kids were like the hardest population to work with. And I knew somehow at that point I was going to work with adults eventually. I would want to, or
Yeah.
at least maybe people just like closer to my age. And so my reasoning at the time, which is humorous looking back, was like, well, why don't I get experience working with the hardest population first? So it's like the best kind of experience. And then down the line, I'll work with the age group I want to.
Okay.
And I say this as humbly as possible because it was a surprise to me that it turned out I was actually good at working with kids, like in the crisis mental health treatment settings. So I worked with kids in crisis for about 5 or 6 years. The bulk of that was spent working with suicidal teenagers. And jumping ahead, I eventually transitioned into working with adults, like suicidal adults in inpatient units and hospitals. But it was working with those suicidal teens in a locked residential program, like a very strict therapeutic program. That's where I actually started to develop my approach. I had
Okay.
never thought of having my own business at that point.
Okay.
Actually, I should say I've thought about having my business, just had no clue what the business would be. And I didn't want to do therapy at that point yet.
Okay.
And so I developed this approach working with these kids that not only showed them all of their patterns and all of their cycles and all their thought processes that I could literally draw out like on a whiteboard. Be like, hey, look, this is why your life has happened the way it's happened. But
Right.
I would also then show them, hey, if you just like, I would circle on the whiteboard, like, hey, if you just did something a little different here, your life could actually look like this. And that's what was so mind blowing and effective about it. It wasn't any like crazy technique. It was just showing that life can be a different way for these kids who were suicidal and wanted to end their lives. And so that's what I really started using as my approach. And years later, when I was confident enough to take the leap to start my own company, even though I was applying it toward different kinds of products and services, it was always that approach. And
Right.
that's the same approach I use now. So I absolutely had a lot of therapy experience. And at this
Yeah.
point, I mean, that was like 10 years ago. And at this point, I've worked with over 10,000 people. And so experiential
That's
degree
awesome.
in a
Yeah.
way
Definitely.
to get me to feel like I can be a coach,
That's awesome.
start a
That's great.
coaching business.
That's great. It's funny that you talk about the title itself, right? Because like I have a therapist and I guess it's weird cuz I feel like instead of being like a therapist or a life coach, what it all boils down to is you're just a really good friend, right? You're like a friend that's like supposed to be a friend, right? Like that like actually is like, hey man, like you can do it. I'm gonna help you here. Like this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna create a plan and you know stuff like that. And like for some reason, maybe I don't know. I like my friends, but I don't see them, you know, breaking it down for me like that. Or maybe we don't look at our immediate friends with that type of knowledge, right? And what do you think, I guess, is the leading thought process that people go through when going down that road of being suicidal or becoming suicidal?
Nice. Well, you said something so great, and then you took a left turn with the question. So now I want to answer
Sorry.
everything. No, 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 no. It's great stuff. That's great. Um, first I want to just commend you on that insight about like the vibe you're supposed to have with a coach or a therapist. It is supposed to be friendly. Um, but I think what you're really speaking to is like the rapport and the trust you have with them, that that like if you get on a call or if you go into a session, that there's a comfort level with the
Right.
person. There's confidence and there's trust. Uh, and the funny thing, it made me think like, if I didn't have, luckily I was very good at creating rapport with those kids I used to work with really quickly, whether it was with humor or just chatting, just asking questions like you do, just whatever. I would create that rapport really quickly. I wouldn't just show up with a whiteboard and be like, hey, here's your issues and this is what you can do. Because then they'd just be like, screw you. Why are you in my face? Why are you telling me how to change my life?
Right.
Uh, so you're exactly right that friendliness and that rapport and that trust has to come first. Um, but to your question, which is a wonderful question and a deep question, I just want to make sure that I heard it right. So are you just talking about what is the thought process that leads people to
Yeah.
suicidality?
Yeah, and I guess I don't want to generalize it too much because everyone has their own issues, right? I mean, um, and everyone gets there, I guess, a different way. But in that moment when it's being considered, what do you think most people are really feeling? And so, and why I say that, because in my opinion, I think most people, the biggest problem, and maybe it's an underlying issue, is that most people in that moment just feel alone. And
Mhm.
really, you know, there's a lot of shit that we go through in life, and there's a lot of things that, you know, that like life, life, if for lack of better words, life sucks, right? But people make it better. Um, And I think when people feel like there's no one there to help them make it better, that's when that whole suicidal ideology gains fruition in their mind.
Mhm.
So I guess I was wondering your opinion on that.
Sure. Yeah, I could say things like that. I mean, you nailed it in the beginning though in saying that it's different for a lot of people. The overall the overall experiences can kind of be generalized a little bit, and there's this amazing book. I wish I knew remember the I wish I remembered the author, but I know that the title was something as simple and general as Why People Die by Suicide. So I highly recommend that book to you and to anybody listening, just because it really breaks it down. Um, there are lots of ways that people, the way that I will like sort of generalize it is into the buckets of feeling aimlessness and feeling hopelessness or helplessness. And so, aimless, as in whatever circumstances have led you to get to a point where you think that there is no point going further. Your life has no meaning, your life has no direction, there's no purpose up for you. Why are you just taking up space? And hopeless, I differentiate it because that's not so forward thinking. I think of hopelessness and helplessness as in like this almost like this panic and like sadness of right now, of just like, gosh, I like just can't get out of this pain. I can't get out of this discomfort. And they think that their life is only going to be that pain and their discomfort. And I think it's awesome that you brought up that friendliness and rapport first before asking this question, because a lot of the kids I worked with didn't have that friendliness with their parents or their family members. So
Right.
they would feel extremely alone, like you said. And it's a huge theme of aloneness, and how a lot of people just aren't able to see how their life could possibly be different because it just seems too big. It's like, okay, I got to fix my mental health, my physical health. I got to get a new job. You know, maybe I'll get a girlfriend someday. All my friends left me. It just seems like too many things are going on. And so I think a lot of times people are responding a lot more to those emotions of hopelessness and aimlessness. And then, very much at a breaking point, will then think, okay, maybe it's better if I'm not here, or actually make that decision. But there's a lot of fear involved with that. A lot of people take a very long time and actually need to kind of condition themselves to the idea of killing themselves, because evolutionarily, our brains don't want us to kill ourselves. Our
Right.
brains and bodies do not want us to die. And so in that book I mentioned, there are lots of examples of how people actually sort of like train themselves with self-harm and with like self-abuse to start just kind of like getting a little more and more comfortable with that almost mortal pain. So it can be a much longer process than oftentimes people are aware of.
So, I guess going through school, big misconception is people that say cut their wrist, right, want attention. But that's more of a training mechanism to trick the mind to have the ability to be like, this can be easy.
Yeah. And it can be both simultaneously. So many people will use it as like a way of, because they just don't know how to verbally, like, here's the thing, so many kids these days and so many high schoolers and things, they just like, they have a hard time raising their hand and using their voice to say, hey, I'm feeling really terrible and I really need help. That's really hard. I mean, it's hard
Yeah.
for adults too. Um, and so kids especially will just do something to get attention. So I like, little kids will act out. Little kids will throw something or break something. It's because they don't know how to use their words yet.
Right.
Right. So it can definitely be both, because if someone is not able to verbally reach out and ask for help, then they're also going to do this thing because they're feeling so alone.
Yeah. I think you're right. And I think there's an interesting thing happening there. And the reason why I think more people are struggling with, I would almost say, I would almost say mental health and finding that, like, why am I here question. And I think it partly has to do with the way we've set up the way we are in society. And this is one thing that I keep questioning even now is, we've set ourselves up and the way our society is designed. We wake up, we do the same thing every day, right? No matter what your job is. If you work for a corporation, which majority of America does, um, you do the same thing every day, and you're just supposed to accept that. And I think let me wrap this back in. So you're
It's
supposed
okay.
to accept that, and then where I think it affects kids, especially now, is that there's a huge culture in being noticed right now, right? And so how do you get noticed in essentially a system that is designed to make you not unique?
Yeah, dude,
So,
well, yeah, you just hit the nail on the head. I love it. That's such a great question. Um, you know, I just reread an article that's perfect to reference here by Erin Griffith. She wrote it like 3 years ago, but it was for just the hustle culture these days, and like millennials and Gen Zers sharing on Instagram or on just on social media this ethos of how much they absolutely love their job and that they're just like they're hustling. It's like the hustle porn. It's entrepreneurial porn. It's like just that mindset that like you like don't quit until you're done or get only 2 hours of sleep a night, so working on your side hustle, all of those things.
which is
But what she
ridiculous.
thank you, I agree. Totally ridiculous. And what she said in the article, which was an amazing point, is that a lot of like these younger generations, I think starting kind of with my generation, the millennial generation, were brought up to think what you were just saying. If you get good grades and have a lot of extracurricular activities, and then you get a job and you move up in that job, then you will kind of automatically be granted access to fulfillment and happiness. And like, it's basically like if you check off all the right boxes, you will be rewarded with a job that you love.
Yeah.
And obviously, that's bullshit.
Right, it is, and it's something I recently realized, and it is also another contributing factor for. I know I hadn't started recording yet, but um, of why I quit my job. So anyone listening to this is gonna finally know that I quit my job. Uh, but
Woohoo!
yeah, but I woke up one day and I was with my girlfriend in Arizona, and I woke up and I remember just, I can't remember if it was a work day or not, but I remember looking at her and going, "Isn't this ridiculous?" And she's like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "I wake up every day to do this thing every day for someone else that could care less if I'm a part of what they're doing or not." And I'm like, "Doesn't that just seem ridiculous to you?" And she didn't know how to answer it, right? Because that's how we're trained to live life, like you said, to gain fulfillment. And one thing I'm reading, I don't know if you ever read Stumbling Upon Happiness. Um,
I don't think so.
great, great book, highly recommend it. I have it right here. It's by Daniel Gilbert. Um, and so I'm in the middle of reading that. One thing it always questions is, uh, I there's a big misnomer in how we use the word happiness, and happiness is more the fulfillment that you get out of your purpose in life, right? To be genuinely happy is way different than what we use the word happy for. And I feel like currently, and I feel like I caught myself, but we are all chasing things that only make us happy for an instant, right? So you're chasing that promotion, you'll be happy, and then 2 weeks, maybe 2 months into that job, you're gonna hate it, or
Mm.
you're chasing that new car to make you happy, and then when you put 1,000 miles on it, you're like, all right, it's my car, right? It's whatever. You're chasing new jewelry, you're chasing better clothes, you're just always chasing these things. It's like a drug, right? So you're chasing the drug of what you perceive to be happiness instead of finding your own. We're all addicted. So anyone that, looks at drug addicts and goes, I don't know how they can do that. We all do that. We literally
Uh-huh.
all do that in our lives because that's the drug we're chasing is happiness. And we only get it out of these little blurts of values because no one, I feel like people have lost the ability to question their purpose and find what genuinely brings them fulfillment in life today.
Uh-huh. Yep. Confirmed. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And going on with what I was just saying, like a lot of people will then kind of like fake that happiness or post on social media or something to try and get noticed, like you were asking about, for just that little drug hit. Because like maybe they don't like their job, but they just want to make it they want some kind of validation or stimulation or joy about the fact that they're trying. And that and it's such a short term transient
Yeah.
thing, like you said. And I I mean, everybody has lots of different definitions of happiness and things, but I actually define it slightly differently even than Mr. Gilbert did. And I think of happiness. I mean, happiness is just one of the original five basic emotions.
Right.
Like joy, fear, sadness, anger, and it's debated, but shame. And but so it's just another emotion. It's not something. It's too much of an extreme for people to try and be happy and achieve happiness and sustain happiness 24/7. You just can't do that. It's impossible. However, we humans do a really good job of putting perfectionist pressure on ourselves to try to achieve these ideals and then hold on to those ideals, but we can't. And so I think of fulfillment, kind of like you were saying, as literally like if you're fulfilling an order, like Amazon, like if you're fulfilling an order that was placed. And I think about that order as your actual passion and purpose. And I have my own
Okay.
definitions of those too, which we can go into in a minute. But like, so fulfillment comes because you are fulfilling what your own purpose and passion are. And that is the longer term sustained level of, I call contentment. Other people would call it joy. Buddhists might call it kind of like blissful acceptance kind of thing. Um, but I think happiness is overblown because it's just another emotion and it's a shorter term hit that people are looking for.
Yeah, I definitely think you are right. I think it's interesting how, and I think the way you, I guess, how do I want to word this? So going back to the social media, right? People post and they're constantly, I am one who did it, right? So I guess I'll take you a little bit through my thought process of it. There was a point in time where I literally chose to shed my feelings, and what I mean by that is I chose to not feel things. I trained myself, much like how you I don't want to necessarily compare it to that, but you know how you said you train yourself for death. I wouldn't say I was training myself for death, but I trained myself to not feel things, right? And and um I did that because it made it easier. I would say it made it easier for me to do the things that society thought to be cool, fun, and acceptable. And so I think it was interesting because, like, that was when I was posting. I was posting me at clubs, at parties, in San Diego, doing crazy things, whatever. Whatever I thought was cool at the time, right? And posting, hey, I got this great new job, which I just quit. So, like, posting that and being super excited and like being like, yeah, I'm doing it, and I'm doing it. I think part of it, it's like I'm doing it better than you, and I think that's it's a little chauvinistic, but that's the idea. And uh it just doesn't work. I feel like it just doesn't work like that. Once you realize that that's what you're doing, it doesn't work like that, right? And I think when I first realized it can be reflected in my social media because I specifically went from posting like maybe once a month or whatever, um, and posting pictures of me and pictures with friends and everything to just posting things that I was doing. And it's funny because the things that you're doing don't get as many likes, right? I got maybe half the
Yeah.
amount of likes. I'll post the famous park in not Friends, and what's that show? Uh famous in San Francisco, Full House. Full House. Sorry.
Okay.
I knew
Yeah.
it started
Yeah.
with an F. All
It's all right.
right. That famous park, right? I posted a picture of me sitting there and it probably got, and I wasn't even in the picture. No one who was a person was in the picture. It's just a view, and got maybe half the likes that a usual post by me gets. And such an
Mhm.
I just think it's very interesting that once you realize it and try to leave it behind, and at that moment I realized it, it's interesting to see, I guess you see how many people just want to see you meet society standards and how many people support just everything you're doing.
Mhm. Yeah. You're right. I think support is a really good way to put it because, like, a lot of the people who follow me on Instagram, and at the moment, Instagram's really the only social media I post on, um, are a lot of people I know. I mean, there's a handful, like a good amount of people who I don't, but maybe they know somebody that I do know or whatever. So it is definitely a form of support and like kind of an exchange because I'm sharing some kind of insight that hopefully is helpful for the person. It's not any kind of sales pitch or anything like that, but then they might like the photo, and then I just see that kind of as support because I know the person. And I mean, lots of thoughts on this, but I think you're right. I mean, like you're kind of touching on vulnerability, and like I actually just did a workshop earlier this week on what vulnerability really is. And one of the participants asked a question about how does vulnerability show up in social media these days, and especially with politics and racism and all other ways that social media are being used at the moment. And it's interesting, like what you just said, there's less, what I have found is that there's less pressure to be vulnerable. Like everybody's just kind of like experimenting being vulnerable. There's like, it's not as much of an overwhelming or intimidating onus around the idea of vulnerability because we have platforms. We can be vulnerable on whatever platform we want, in whatever ways we want, and it's celebrated. A lot of people will like and follow that, depending on what the brand is. But a lot of people still don't know how to be vulnerable and like what extent of vulnerability they should be sharing. Um, and then, like what you were just saying, you kind of closed off your emotions to show some kind of version, even though you weren't showing a version of your life that was actually true and authentic. You were still being vulnerable. You were still expressing something of yourself, but you came to realize like, oh wait, do I want to be posting that anymore? Who am I posting it for? Who is it that is quote unquote posting? What identity is this?
Right. And I'm, I'm definitely not the only one. I feel like I see people all the time get lost. For lack of better words, lost in the sauce, right? It's like they're
Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
and I'm starting to, unfortunately, it's starting to, I don't like social media. I'm starting to dislike social media. I want it to be very known. I have it for Man Meets Modern purposes usually, and I may post on my personal page once every couple months. But for the most part, it's for this. This is the only thing I do on social media because I just, you look at the examples of some of these people that are just like going to the deepest depths to get recognized on there, right? I watched a video, and funny maybe, but like I watched a video of a kid jumping up at a register at Walmart and pouring milk all over his body and then leaving. And I'm like, why? Like at what point it's almost like I'm a big like mind my own business person. If that's what you want to do, like go do it. I'm not gonna say anything. I'm not gonna care in the situation and be like, you shouldn't do that. Do whatever makes you feel wonderful. But at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, at what point are you just sacrificing yourself to just to just get noticed, right? Like that's what it's about, right? Like it goes back to what I said earlier, it's all about getting noticed. And that's what's really starting to make me hate social media, is that everyone wants to get noticed. So everyone keeps going to them. We almost, it's like living through a picture, right? You're so worried about taking the picture, you forget to live in the moment. And that's what it is, right? You're so worried about what other people are doing, saying, what videos
Yeah.
they're posting, what, all that you don't take the time to be in the moment with yourself and to be just to be in life, right? Like life is not that. Life is not this. Like,
Uh-huh.
the my phone. Like this is not, I can't, I almost can't stand it. It almost makes me think that like the world, I don't want to generalize it too much, but I think people were in a better place when this wasn't as much of a thing. And to be honest, because
Sure.
it literally controls life. It controls life. It controls your idea. You live on it. When people go out to eat on their phone, right? I know
Mhm.
there's times, I've been with people and I've gotten mad. I'm just like, well, what's so important? Like be here with me. Like just have a conversation. We're friends. We've been friends for 4 or 5 years. Why? Why be on the phone? It's an hour of your time. Like, you're not gonna miss anything, and it's just absolutely ridiculous.
You're right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm a human being. I can be caught judging people here and there at times, but in general, I don't judge people because it's their life. It's not my life. I may not find anything that they're doing appealing or entertaining or like cool in the slightest, but that's fine. That's my opinion. Right. I completely agree with you about the phones. And it's actually really challenging, or I should say, a challenge that I'm facing right now as a business owner. Basically, 99% of my business has always been my one on one coaching, all 6 years that I've had my business. And basically all of it has come from referrals, word of mouth, intimacy, relationships, just like knowing the person and saying, hey, you should go talk to Taylor. And I love that. I absolutely prefer that for my one-on-one coaching because it creates that rapport. And in my kind of work, since it's very much based on therapy, I want that privacy. I want to maintain that privacy for my clients and for me. So we have this container, we have this safe space. But on the entrepreneurial side of things, especially because I've scaled out to a little bit more of educational products, I have a membership that I'm building out right now. I'm posting more on social media, but it's just like I feel that pull. And the thing that I hate the most is that if I'm walking around anywhere, whether it was Utah or New York City, I'll notice like, hey, that's a cool picture. And I'll notice my brain will automatically start to caption it. Even if I don't ever even take the picture, my brain will start thinking as though like, ooh, could this be used for my brand? I hate that. It like viscerally is uncomfortable for me when I do that. And I know that that times 1,000 is what influencers and so many personal brand owners are doing all the time. Like you said, people on beaches, people in these exotic locations are taking these pictures, and they'll take 1,000 of those pictures. They won't be in the moment because they'll be thinking, okay, how can I get this amazing, beautiful experience captured for my brand?
Right. And I 100% agree with you on the battle, right? I think yeah, I'm the same way, right? I think it's tough because you have to put stuff out there for your business, right? And same with Man Meets Modern. I'm supposed to post something, or my business partner, we're supposed to put something out there every day, right? And I don't every day because I think it's that internal battle of I don't want to get to where, like, I'm out and about. And it was getting like that to a point when I first started. I remember I was like that, where I was just out and about. I'd have to take a picture of this and take a picture of that and stay up on it. And you're trying to get noticed by more people because you're trying to grow your business. And then it's like you fall into the trap, right? And it's like trying so hard to gain business by not falling into the trap. It's
Yeah.
definitely very difficult. And I would like to go to, I know, uh, from your description, you talk a lot about anxiety, right? I think one thing, I think today that's something a lot of people deal with. I know me personally, I've dealt with it to the point that I have panic attacks weekly
Mm.
because of my anxiety. Uh, and so I guess, what do you think what do you think's changed that maybe we're more just aware that it's called anxiety, right? That's a theory I feel like that's out there, is that, especially with any mental health, is that, well, mental health hasn't grown, people are just more aware that they are, they can recognize it, right? um there's a comedian, I forgot his name, that makes a joke, and he goes, uh he's like, I think us knowing mental health was the worst thing, because now it's like, I have anxiety. And then you're like, well, what do you want me to do about it? You know what I mean? Like, everyone just sits there and questions, well, what do I do about it? Now you're just yelling at people like, I have this, right? And like, no
Yeah.
one knows what to do and how to react. I think it's something that becomes a grip on life. And I guess, what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on anxiety controlling people? And I guess, what do people, what do you think leads people to becoming, I guess, what do you think led me to becoming as anxious as I did? Not to turn this, I guess I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to make it a coaching session, but I know for me, it was probably, a lot of it was my job. But yeah, I guess I'm just gonna let you talk. I don't know. I don't want to keep rambling. I'm gonna let you talk.
That's all right. Well, first I'm going to respond to that piece that you just said. And like, it's similar humorously to people who are now almost like, or would come out and almost brag about like, oh, I had COVID. I had coronavirus, as though it's like a badge of honor. And in a lot of ways in the mental health world, it can be a badge of honor. It can be very authentic and real to post. Like I know so many people who have gone on social media and said like beautifully authentic and honest expressions of their anxiety and their depression. Be like, hey guys, I don't normally talk about this, but I want it to be known that I'm working on this now. That is totally the opposite of what you were just describing of the people who are just like, yeah, I have anxiety, as though it's like a publicity stunt.
Right.
And the way I think about that, and we could put a pin in this and come back to it, is that that is a very misguided exploration for identity. A lot of people love having the label. And so as soon as they have a diagnosis or they identify with, ooh, I have anxiety, I'm an anxious person, they're like, oh, thank goodness, I now have a label for myself. I now have an identity. But then they don't do anything about it because they feel so much comfort just from having the label because now they can get attention.
Yeah, and maybe it's my mindset. I feel like it's, and I don't want to demean those people in any way, but I feel like it's such a weird thing to gain attention for, right? I feel like I never want attention for being like, yo, this is what's wrong with me. Right? Like
Yeah.
kind of like the whole the people that thought they were uber cool for having like a broken arm and a cast, right? Hey, like this is what's wrong with me,
Yeah.
right? I think it's just a very I think it's okay to be open about it. Like you said, right? It's okay to be like, hey, I'm starting this journey, I'm battling this, and like, wish me luck on it, right? I'm being open with you on the podcast right now. And it's not because I want recognition or people to recognize. I don't, it's not even that I want people to recognize my what's going on with me. I think it's more that, I preach it's okay to be vulnerable and to show, that everyone has something that they're dealing with. But like it's not
Mhm.
by any means I don't want people to be like, "Yeah, man, go fight that battle." Like I'm doing all right. Like I'm doing okay. I got it. I don't need that amp
Well,
up.
you're fine now because you quit your job.
Yeah, yeah.
um, oh, what was I just gonna say? Yeah, about the attention seeking piece. Like, yeah, it was just like what we talked about earlier. People who self harm to get attention. It seems like why would somebody do that? But what we have to remember and what we have to keep in mind is that there's some real pain underneath there. There's some real insecurities. And so even the people who are screaming from the rooftops on social media of like, hey, I have anxiety. Everybody look at me. Check me out. I have anxiety. It's like, okay, cool. But where is that coming from? Like what act like that person's not asking for help verbally, but they really are asking for help. So there's something underneath. There's that real deep down fear or concern or pain or discomfort that they're finally speaking something to, and it feels good to chip off one little layer of the lock, but they're not actually getting at or sharing what is like the real insecurity behind
Yeah.
it.
Oh, and then how much worse do you think it gets that the the world, like I said, the world's kind of a shitty place. Um, and just all the hate that you read under certain people's like post or something, right? And like just pure hatred for no reason. They don't even know them personally. It's just like for example, I can't remember, I don't know whose it was, but I remember reading on someone's post. It was like them dancing with a shirt off, and someone literally goes, "You fat piece of shit." And I'm just like, dude,
Mhm.
what? What is wrong with you? Like, like I don't think like is he large? Yeah, but like why did you feel the need to like take you literally took time out of your day to try and affect someone that you don't know? I think that's just amazing. Like it is, I just don't,
Yeah.
I'm astounded by like how people just have the ability to just do that. Like and just care enough to be like, I need to hurt this person today. Today's the day, you know?
Today's the day. Yeah. Well, the funny thing, Curtis, is that that's the exact same thing happening. Like Gary Vaynerchuk talks about this all the time, that if you get any kind of hate messages or hateful comments, then all we can do is be empathetic toward that person who left the comment, because clearly something is really going on in their life that they think it's important to take time out of their day to watch your video, first of all, and then develop this opinion and then share it publicly. Something is really going on with them. So it's literally the exact same question of like, what's their pain? What are they trying to hide by being a bully to somebody else?
Yeah, and I think to rope this back in, I think it leads to people having anxiety, and then when you have anxiety about what the thing that controls a lot of people's life, social media and posting, I think that it just snowballs, right? I remember I posted I posted an article, not really controversial. It was an article about, how to get a girl to notice you, right? And it was literally tips that I did in college that worked. Is It was nothing offensive. I asked multiple girls to read it and we're like, yeah, this sounds fine. I'm like, I don't want to offend anybody. I don't want this to sound like, weird in any way. And they're like, no, it sounds fine. Like, yeah, and these would work. And so,
Nice.
but I remember I posted it and these people came out of nowhere. One, the most amazing post is I got called a misogynist. And I'm like, where and anywhere in that article does it say I dislike or hate women? And I'm like, there's nowhere. It literally says at the end of the article, make sure you, all else fails, like make sure you just respect women and their privacy and their peace, right? And like that's like literally maybe it does say respect women. I don't know if it says privacy peace, but like, yeah, that's what it says at the end. I'm like, where did you get misogyny out of that? And then, other people are like, this is a load of bullshit. And I'm just like, my one comment to someone before I deleted it, because I just like didn't feel like dealing with it anymore. I didn't delete the article. I just deleted that form that I posted it on because the rest of them were doing fine. And even I had people reposting it. But was well, at the end of the day, you read it. Like that was my comment,
Yeah.
right? Like at the end of the day, like you can call it what you want. You can say I totally bullshit. Yeah, you can say I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. End of the day, you read it. Like
Yep.
and that's what I need you to do. And I got no response after that, right? Like when they realize they've been got right, like words of Marshawn
Uh-huh.
Lynch, they go and get got. Um, uh, they have nothing to say, but it brought me anxiety. It brought me like anxiety about the article itself. And I had to go back and I asked my girlfriend, I was like, hey, is this a bad article? I was with her at the time when I posted it. And she was
Hmm.
like, no, it's fine. People are just being like ridiculous about it. And I go, okay, thank you. Right. And like I had to go get that validation. But for that moment, I'm like, do I need to delete this all? Should I go on my website? Right. And that's what anxiety does. And that's the snowball effect, right? Boom, that happened. Now it's like I gotta go back. I'm like, okay, did I post anything else that people might have not liked or disliked? And that's the snowball effect I think anxiety causes a lot of people, and stopping that is difficult.
Hmm.
Super difficult.
Absolutely. And before I touch on that, I love what you said that, like, yeah, they read your article. So that should actually be validation in a way. And Trent Shelton, who's like the famous YouTuber and everything and mental health advocate as well, he famously said that haters are just confused supporters because they have watched all your stuff. Like people who hate on his YouTube videos, they've watched his YouTube videos. So
I love
like
that. That's great.
he just needs, so instead of being anxious about their words, just be like, all right, cool, well they just watched my stuff, so as long as I'm just kind of like open and I'm gracious, they'll like maybe become supporters, or maybe they'll become clients or whatever it is, but they just need to get past their own walls that they've put up and that they needed to like put up in your comments. um yeah, period. That's the end of that sentence.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that saying, right? They're confused supporters. Because at, at what point are you able to call yourself not a supporter when you watch all of it, right? Like you said, right? When you're watching all of it, you read it. You took the time out of your day to read it all the way through, to then go back to the post, comment, and write that was a load of shit. And I'm like, you read it, man. You read it, you thought about it. And
You can
then
almost commend, you like almost want to commend the person. Like, thank you so much for taking the time to write this comment.
would you like a discount at the store, man? Like, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, seriously. Yeah.
It's insane. I think one of the hot button issues that I would like to dive into that I've gotten from our conversation is the whole notice me factor, right? I think that's something we've talked about throughout this whole podcast. And I think it's important to define that. So what do you think about, how would you define this notice me culture and how would you stop it? I guess if you could wave a magic wand, how would you stop it? Right? The famous sales question. If you could wave a magic wand to make it better, what can I do to make it
Yeah,
better? So tell me, what do you think, man? What would you do? What would you wave and like, abracadabra to make it better?
right. Um, I I'm excited to tell you my answer for that part, and I'll talk to you. I'll
Okay.
talk about the first part first.
Yeah.
Um, there's another book I read. I think it's literally just called Selfie, and it actually goes through like the past few hundred years of history and talking about how, long story short, the Industrial Revolution led us to be able to be much more independent because then we can like make food for ourselves and all that, and that self sustainability or self sufficiency and independence made us very entitled people, because we're like, oh, cool, like, we don't need the world, we don't need to depend on other things, we can just do everything on our own. And so these days, that type of entitlement comes through in the notice me culture, and that sense of entitlement is in that hustle culture that I was talking about earlier too. um, and so that's how I think of it. I think of it as we are noticing our power. We're noticing that we have voices. I mean, actually, it's all past tense now. Like, we have noticed how to use social media. Um, but it's always kind of tying in with what we were just talking about. If someone is putting themselves on blast saying, I have anxiety, look at me, like, notice me, give
Right.
me validation for admitting that I have anxiety, it's like, it really just boils down to, or I always think about it as, why are you asking the world for that kind of support and validation? Why are you putting it on that platform? And why are you saying it like that? And the reason I say that is because, and I grant, there are amazing people who run super successful YouTube channels, and they're vulnerable every single episode, and that's their brand, and it's beautiful. Like, more power to them. I think that's awesome that, like, that's how they built their impact. But for people who are just wanting to notice me, like, they're kind of in between, where they're like, I have anxiety, but they also don't want to like be totally vulnerable.
Right.
Those are the ones of like, okay, well, maybe you should ask like a friend for support first, or a coach, or a therapist, or a parent, or a teacher, before you go to millions on millions of people on Instagram. Because then you're going to get all these hateful comments, like you were just saying, and then it's going to cause anxiety. And the anxiety makes you overthink things, and you become overwhelmed, and you can't think rationally then about how that person's comment literally matters less than nothing in the overall scheme of things.
Yeah. I think, yeah. And the best way, um, so I think it's a good way to define anxiety too. The best way panic attacks were defined to me as were actually through my therapist. Shouts out. Um, but he basically remembered a joke. So I guess it's him citing someone else. So like it was through Joe Rogan. So sorry, therapist. But was that it's the inability, as you were talking about, it snowballs, and then you start overthinking life itself, right? You overthink everything, and panic attacks are the extreme version of that, right? So it's the inability um, to separate fear from actual danger, right? So your mind has developed itself. You've gained so much snowball effect on that anxiety that you've developed yourself that you don't know, your body doesn't know when to say, okay, I'm just uncomfortable. Sorry, not fear, uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. I'm just uncomfortable or I'm in danger. And that's when you have them. That's why you have them in certain situations. And so that I just wanted to say that because I think it's a great explanation. I think it also can explain anxiety to a sense, is you don't know the difference between being uncomfortable and just, for anxiety, overthinking, right? You don't know
Mhm.
that. You don't know that difference. You start, the line starts becoming blurred in that situation. But anyways, continue. What's your magic wand, or was that your magic wand?
No, 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 no. I definitely have a
Okay.
magic wand. But to your point right there, that'll be a nice little segue. Um, I think about anxiety. I kind of define it as a response to a change, a response to something unfamiliar. You don't need to be making a huge change in your life to feel anxiety, obviously, but anxiety is often felt when something's unexpected or when something's just new and unfamiliar. And to answer a question that you asked, half an hour ago at this point, uh, that's what's changed, especially in this past year. The pandemic and the lockdown and the new awareness of mental health issues, that is very unfamiliar for people. And the amount of anxiety people are feeling is is exacerbated by the pandemic because everything's uncertain, which means that every single day is unfamiliar. What the day is going to look like, what your health is going to look like, what the world is going to look like. So everybody is in a state of their own anxiety because everybody is responding to this new version of unfamiliar in their lives. And so that's why, and then what happens is the typical response, like physical response, is some kind of like stress response, and it's uncomfortable. Like you're wherever you feel it in your body, it is not fun. It's not enjoyable. You could get used to managing it, like you're nervous before stepping on stage. Like you're gonna feel uncomfortable, but it's still just painful. And so that's why our brains then overthink. Like this is our brains just are trying to come up with a reason for the pain, for the discomfort, because it feels like some kind of threat to our survival. So our brains just immediately go into hyperdrive. And that's unfortunately why everybody shoots up into their head and overthinks things when they're anxious instead of just remembering where's the pain in the body, like the pain's still there. And you just overthink, hoping that that's going to cause some kind of relief. But it doesn't. You're not really
Does not.
making any kind of. Yeah, exactly. Exhibit
Does
A.
not.
Right. And it sometimes creates a lot more anxiety because it's like a swirling storm of thoughts that becomes like really overwhelming. Um, and because of that, like that just, it all just becomes so extreme and intense. And like everybody gets very disconnected from what they're actually feeling in their body, like where the discomfort is, where the pain is. And so if I had a magic wand, it literally would just be to kind of like Santa Claus, somehow go to every single household and just hug everybody. Just give them a hug. Just like everybody needs that grounding warmth and like legitimately caring uh sensation of just like, oh my gosh, like I don't need to be thinking right now. I can just be held and I can just be hugged and I can just be down here on the earth in the discomfort, and I'll be okay and I'll be safe.
Yeah, I like that. That's I not what I expected. But
What did you expect? Did you have a
um
guess?
no, I guess I just didn't think a hug was the answer. I don't know. I
It's my answer. It's not
yeah,
the answer.
right,
Everybody will
right,
have
right.
their own magic wand.
But yeah, I guess that's interesting you say that because a lot of people, especially in men, I feel like avoid stuff like that, right? I think a lot of men avoid that, but me personally, I love hugs. Um,
Yeah.
it's but there is that moment, and why it took me a second to, I guess, process what I wanted to say was because I I took myself to that moment, right? To if someone could just take me and came to my house and just hugged me, and I was able just to drop my arms and do that. That sigh, right? That's what it is. And that, I think that's what you're getting at, right? To do that. Like,
100%. Yes.
so yeah, I was taking myself to that moment, right? That like it's okay. It's okay. We're all here, we're all people, everything's gonna be okay. I, I think that I think you're right. I think there's some truth there. I think that could help a lot of people. And unfortunately, like maybe some of the kids you dealt with, they don't have that support system to do that for them, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think that's a huge problem too. But yeah, I think that's a great answer. I like that. I like that a lot.
Thanks. Yeah, and you were touching on, this is a little bit of a plug, but this is really important to me and how I run my business too, because obviously I'm not like hugging all my clients, or any of them, and it's all virtual at this point. Um, but what you just said is the foundational purpose of my job, like what I do, like my unique purpose, my unique power. The first step of it is just reminding people that it's okay to be human, that we're all just human. We're all feeling stuff, and we just need to be brought down. We need to feel that humility of being human again, because everybody's trying to do way too many things. We're distracted by so many things. We're trying to do too much, like with our work. We're trying to do too much in our relationships. We're trying to pay attention to too many things on our phones and in the media. And we just need to be brought down to remember, like, you can't do it all the time. And everything you're feeling, all the anxiety, all the depression, all the overwhelm, all the stress, all the anger, that's totally okay. And so that's why, like, that hug, or that like metaphorical hug, is the first step to just bring people back down, to be like, yeah, let your arms go, take a breath. And like the second part of my business and the second part of my purpose is, once people have taken that breather and are feeling that humility of like, oh gosh, yeah, oh, okay, I can breathe, I am a human, I can't do everything, then that next part is when I actually help them in a structured way define purpose in their life, find the meaning, and be like, okay, here's your actual map to keep yourself guided in a healthy way, so that you don't get overwhelmed, you don't get overly anxious, you don't panic anymore. But it has to start with that hug, the
Yeah.
metaphorical hug.
And I used to be a firm believer in independence being the end all be all, right? I was so overly independent, right? I think that's one thing that caused me to cut all my feelings off, was because it's like it's more baggage than it needs to be, right? You're independent. And
Yeah.
um I want people to know, speaking from experience, independence is not the answer. Independence is great. You should be able to pay your bills, and it's okay to get help here and there, but you should be able to like do things yourself. You know, go to the grocery store by yourself and get food and cook and all that. That's great. But being overly independent is not the end all be all answer. You
Mm-hmm.
need something. Life, and I keep saying it'll be the third time I said it, I feel like, but life sucks, right? Life sucks. And it's too much for one person to handle. It is. It really is. And there was this old ritual we used to do in my fraternity, and it's you would basically break a pencil, right, and be like, this right here, is you by yourself. And I would like to relate that to what I just said, right? Um, so you being overly independent, you by yourself, that's what life will do to you. It'll break you.
Mm-hmm.
If you get a bundle of pencils, though, which would be your support system, it doesn't break. And unless you're superhuman, or maybe the mountain, whoever, go get 30 pencils, put them in a rubber band bundle, and try to break them. It's fairly almost impossible.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's what it is, right? That's what end of the day, if you're by yourself, you're gonna break eventually. And I remember I reached that point, and now I work more on trying to have a support system.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Good.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I think independence is part of the process. It's a very critical part of the process. I work with a lot of people who, at varying ages, are still find themselves very dependent on whoever they're dating, or their friends. And what I teach is that you have to you have to basically date yourself. I'm going to say, you basically have to depend on yourself first, before you can be in a like truly balanced or equally divided relationship with somebody. because and that's the independence. You have to learn how to be independent with yourself. You have to learn to be okay with yourself on your own. And then that next step is, and this is like a funny definition of dating and marriage that I've thought about before, and then a therapist has told me in the past too, that it's the combination of two independent people coming together to tolerate each other's differences. And it's a highly like, I mean, that's somewhat demoralizing, but
Right.
we all know that there's so much happiness to be gained in relationships. So I just always view relationships as like, once you're comfortable being independent yourself and you're comfortable with yourself, then you're finding another independent person to just hang out with. And so it's two independent people who are dating, but now then it's like supporting each other. So, and then like helping each other with their differences or just being there for each other.
Just so everyone knows, his girlfriend's right to the left. No, I'm just kidding. She's in
Yeah,
the room.
exactly.
He made sure he looked to the left and was like, I need to say this.
That would be great. Yeah, exactly. Was that all right? Did that
Yeah.
sound good? Okay, cool. Yeah.
No,
It's like
yeah.
it's like Dr. Phil. It's like, and now bring out the girlfriend.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you are right. And yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. I don't wanna talk any words around what you said because I think it was a great point. All right, so as you hopefully are familiar with by now, it's time for hold on, I'm gonna try something since the equipment's new.
Yeah.
Um Name the craziest thing or tell a story about the craziest thing you ever did. How'd that sound?
Super dramatic. I'm sure you were going for that.
Awesome, I love it. That's cool. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
but it's time. Tell the story about the craziest thing you ever did. We're all human. We all done crazy things. What's yours?
Oh boy. You know, the funny thing is, even though I've listened to a bunch of your episodes, I did not know that that was actually coming. So I didn't prepare anything. Oh boy. You know, I'm the first to say that I'm not a risk taker. You know, so automatically in my mind is just like, I immediately associate that question with like, what are the riskiest things you've ever done? You know, like, when did you vandalize the school or steal a car or something like that?
Got a mortgage
Uh,
payment. No,
yeah, flirt. Yeah. Oh my God, that would be so perfect if my answer was like, I learned how to do my taxes.
Uh,
um, oh man, good question.
the girlfriend's left, by the way, guys. So he's okay. He's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Um, you know, I think of a couple of things. I don't really marry myself to just like one. And my definition of crazy is obviously different than other people's definition. So like one thing I think of is like a trip I did in the British Columbia where I was like literally mountaineering certain peaks, and I had never done any mountaineering before. But I just kind of like signed up for it because it was like, cool, this will push me out of my comfort zone. This would be fun. Um, and we were safe. We were like harnessed in and all this stuff. But I think about that not as a crazy, like risky or like exhilarating thing, but it was like probably the most flow state I've ever been in. Um, just because you're literally hanging off the side of a mountain and there's so many layers of vertigo that you experience because you're so high up. And it's one of those moments where you're asking yourself, like, how did I get here? Like, why is this happening right now? And you have to ask yourself that while you're then reaching for the next little like hook or bar or something like that. Um, you know, then and then I also think maybe these are similar, like similar reasons why I think of these things, but I've done a lot of psychological or mental health related retreats and things. And there was one, and I have to shout out the Mankind Project. Are you familiar with the Mankind Project,
I'm
Curtis?
not. Lay it down.
Okay. Well, I'm going to connect you with the guy who runs the podcast for them because the Mankind Project is as a global nonprofit that's all about focusing on creating more vulnerable, independent, emotionally intelligent and like emotionally confident men in the world. So it's very much like male mental health focused.
Cool.
And their introductory experience is called the new warrior training adventure. And for the purposes of its impact and its power, I have to keep it confidential in terms of like what they actually do, but it's very experiential. It's very immersive. You're in that experience for the weekend. And that was probably by far the most intense retreat or psychological experience that I've ever had. I've been to a lot of retreats and things. I love that kind of stuff. But it was so out of my comfort zone, and I went into it not even knowing what I wanted out of it. That was kind of the craziest thing. A lot of people went there with like certain things that they knew that they had to focus on. I had to kind of figure out what I wanted to focus on there. And it was by far one of the most transformative, emotional and energetic experiences for me, even though I've grown and evolved to new insights and new epiphanies since then. I had to have that experience to just crack open so much stuff. So I think of that as like the craziest thing, just because it was the most intense, I think, emotional and energetic thing I've ever done. So huge shout out to Mankind Project and Brandon Clift, who's one of my closest friends and runs the Mankind Project podcast.
Oh,
it's called Mask Off Monday is the podcast. So
yeah,
I'll definitely connect you too. You guys would totally jam.
All right, yeah, that'd be great. I love it. That's awesome. I think it's almost better that you went in not knowing, because I think it causes you to reach a little deeper there, to figure out what's truly, you really want to work on. And
it also makes me feel like the most nervous on that first day, because I like drove up there with a few people and they all had like specific things, and I was like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
So it meant that like when I was actually sitting there on the first day, I had no clue what I was getting into, like really no clue what I was going to experience or what I was going to work on. So it forced incredible vulnerability and openness, just because I was like, well, shit, I'm here. Better go there. So,
right. And then,
right.
Where can people find you? You're a life coach. If they want your coaching, plug yourself. What are Instagrams? I know we had the conversation, so if you want to plug it. If you don't, don't. But yeah, where can people find you?
Sure. The name of my company is the Tailored Quill. So tailored like a suit, and then a quill like an old-fashioned feather pen. Tailoredquill.com. And so that's my website. You can access my blog and things there, and my links. The best place would also go to my Instagram, because that is kind of like the hub at the moment. That's where you can find my YouTube channel and interviews I've done like this. But the best thing would be either on there or my website. Just join my email list, because at the moment I'm like rolling out a new educational membership product that I'm really excited about, because I love teaching workshops and classes, and people are expressing that desire and need. So I'm in the middle of like rolling out a couple of things. So I would love it if anybody's listening to this just wants to join my email list or shoot me a DM on Instagram, and just be connected so I can let you know when that happens. And of course, if anybody needs any kind of support, hit me up for a free consultation or a free session. Even if I'm not the coach for you, I want you to feel supported. So I'll at least guide you and maybe give you some suggestions of what kind of support you need.
Awesome. Definitely. And I'll add the link in the description. So, or at least Perfect. The website, link in the description. You might not be able to click that on like Apple Podcasts, but you'll know where to go. People will know where to go.
I think people know how to copy and paste at this point.
Yeah.
I hope.
Well, it was great. I had a great time. I appreciate you coming on the Man Meets Modern podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Curtis. I love this conversation. So this was awesome. Hope we can do it again sometime.
Definitely.
It's a great fucking day.